Hey guys, tonight, close your eyes, let your mind rest, and drift with me back in time. Imagine yourself in medieval Europe, in a world long before electricity, central heating, or the modern comforts you know today. The year is somewhere in the 14th century, and the first hints of winter are slowly creeping across the land. The days are shorter now. The sun lingers only briefly in the sky before it fades, leaving villages and fields under a long, cold twilight. Frost begins to settle on the wooden fences and the thatched roofs of cottages. Each morning, you awaken to a breath of icy air escaping your lips, reminding you that the long winter season is only beginning. In this age, winter was more than just a season. It was a test of endurance. The countryside was painted white with snow, and the bitter winds swept through valleys and across wide plains. Without the comfort of insulated walls or glass windows, the cold was an ever-present guest in every home, slipping through cracks in the stone walls and the gaps around wooden doors. You step outside your cottage and feel the frozen earth beneath your feet. The fields, once alive with the sounds of harvest and the movement of workers, now lie barren and silent. The soil is too hard to till, the trees too bare to gather fruit. The only work that continues is the gathering of firewood, carried carefully on the backs of villagers, or pulled on sledges over the snow. Winter brought with it a heavy stillness. Life slowed down, and the rhythms of the year shifted. Families would retreat indoors earlier in the evening, often gathering around the single fire that burned in the middle of their one-room cottages. The fire was weak and smoky, but it was their only defense against the freezing night air. The orange glow flickered against rough stone walls, while outside, the wind howled and rattled the wooden shutters. For many, winter was a time of hardship. Food had to be carefully rationed. Grain, stored from the last harvest, sat locked away in wooden bins. Dried fish, salted meat, and hard black bread became the staples of survival. You imagine yourself sitting near the fire, your hands warmed by its faint heat, as the smell of a thin vegetable soup rises from a pot hanging above the flames. The meal is simple, yet it fills the air with comfort, even as the cold presses in. As night falls, the darkness outside feels deeper and more endless than in any other season. Without lamps or streetlights, the world beyond the door is swallowed in blackness. The stars shine coldly above, and sometimes the moon casts silver light across the snow, but most nights are swallowed by heavy clouds. People would speak in hushed voices, their words echoing softly through the quiet. In many villages, silence and stillness became as much a part of winter as the snow itself. You imagine the sound of the wind slipping through the trees, the distant bark of a dog guarding its master's land, or the creak of wooden beams under the weight of ice. These were the sounds that filled the long medieval nights. The fire crackled. A child stirred in the corner of the room, and the cold continued its slow, relentless attempt to creep closer. There was, however, also beauty in this season. The land transformed under a layer of frost, and the forests glistened in the pale light of morning. Icicles hung from rooftops like glass daggers, and the breath of every passer-by became a mist that lingered in the air. The countryside seemed frozen in time, as though the earth itself was sleeping beneath a heavy blanket of snow, waiting for the first signs of spring. And in this frozen stillness, people learned to adapt. They had no choice. Winter was not a guest they invited, but a ruler they had to endure. You feel the weight of the cold pressing on your shoulders, but also the quiet acceptance of those who lived through it, year after year. It was part of the natural rhythm of life. Summer for work, autumn for harvest, and winter for survival. On some nights, you might imagine hearing the bells of a distant church, calling people to prayer even in the frost. The sound would travel softly across snowy fields, reminding villagers that faith and community were as important as food and fire in these hard months. People leaned on one another, sharing warmth, sharing stories, and sometimes even sharing what little food they had, knowing that winter could not be faced alone. As you sit by the fire in this medieval cottage, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, you can almost feel the slow passing of time. Each night feels longer than the last. Each day a small victory against hunger and cold. Families counted the weeks, one after another, until the thaw would come again. And yet, despite the struggles, there was also a kind of quiet peace to it all. Life slowed, hearts drew closer, and people discovered how to endure with patience and simplicity. So, as you close your eyes, imagine yourself there, among the snow-covered fields, in a world of flickering firelight and silent nights. The winter has arrived in medieval Europe, and you are part of a story that is centuries old, a story of endurance, of stillness, and of finding warmth in the coldest of times. The fire burns low as the winter night deepens, and you begin to notice the cold creeping in from the corners of the room. Medieval houses, for all their sturdiness, were never truly warm. Built of stone, timber, and mud, they were meant to last, but not to comfort. The walls rose thick and gray, yet they trapped as much chill as they held back. Imagine running your hand across the rough stone surface. It feels damp, almost icy, as though the wall itself has become part of the winter. The mortar between the stones is uneven, leaving cracks where wind whistles through. In wealthier homes, plaster might cover the stone, but even that crumbles and flakes when exposed to damp weather. For the ordinary villager, there is no plaster at all, just bare stone, breathing cold into the air. The roofs above you are thatched with straw or reeds. They keep out rain, but snow sometimes gathers on the thatch, melting slowly, seeping through the layers until droplets fall into the room below. The floor is not wood, but packed earth, uneven and hard. In winter, it grows damp and muddy from melted snow brought in on boots and cloaks. Even inside, the ground can feel as cold as the frozen fields outside. Doors are wooden planks held together with iron nails. They do not seal tightly. When the wind rises, it pushes through the cracks, carrying icy drafts that swirl around ankles and sting exposed skin. In some homes, families hang cloth or animal skins over the doorway, trying to block the worst of it. Yet no barrier can stop the sharp air from finding its way inside. Windows are little more than open holes, sometimes with shutters made of wood. Glass is rare, a luxury for the wealthy. Most villagers cover windows with oiled cloth, thin parchment, or nothing at all. The result is a constant exchange of air. The fire pulls smoke upward, and the drafts pull cold inward. Smoke often lingers inside, clinging to rafters and filling lungs, but people accept it. To them, it is the price of warmth. At night, when the fire burns low, the chill grows unbearable. You can picture families huddling close together, their breath visible in the dim light. They pull blankets of wool across their shoulders, but the fabric is scratchy and thin. Even with layers of clothing, the cold seeps in. Children curl up beside their parents, sometimes even beside livestock brought indoors, all for the shared warmth of living bodies. The wealthy fare a little better. In their stone manors, tapestries hang along walls, not only as decoration but as insulation. Heavy curtains cover windows, and braziers filled with glowing coals sit in corners of the hall. Yet even in such houses, people complain of drafts. Nobles wear furs and layer themselves in rich fabrics, but the chill lingers in their chambers just as it does in the cottages of peasants. It is strange to think of a world where every room, no matter how fine, carries the breath of winter. Today, you close a window or adjust a heater without thought. But in the medieval age, cold was constant. It shaped habits, slowed movements, and seeped into daily life like an invisible presence. People learned to live with it because they had no choice. Still, the house is more than shelter. It is survival. Without its walls, the wind and snow would overwhelm. Within them, there is at least some defense, some space where fire and family can create a circle of warmth. You imagine the sound of the wind outside, rattling the shutters, shaking the door, yet here inside, the fire still glows faintly. The house holds against the storm, imperfect but enduring. And as you sit there, wrapped in coarse wool, you realize that medieval winter was not about comfort. It was about enduring the drafts, the chill, and the stone walls that breathed cold. It was about gathering close, finding strength in company, and holding on until the long months slowly gave way to spring. The center of nearly every medieval home was not a table, not a bed, but a fire. The hearth was the heart of survival, and though it gave only limited warmth, it was the single element that made long winters bearable. Imagine the glow of flames dancing in the dim interior, casting moving shadows across rough stone walls, illuminating faces gathered close around its smoky light. In the simplest cottages, the hearth was nothing more than a shallow pit dug into the earthen floor. Stones lined the edges to keep the flames contained, while wooden beams above blackened slowly from years of rising smoke. There was no chimney, only a hole in the roof or an opening high on the wall. The smoke did not always find its way out. Often it lingered inside, making eyes sting and lungs ache. But people accepted this discomfort, because without the fire there was only darkness and cold. Picture the routine of tending it. Someone always had to watch the flames, feeding them with sticks, logs, or dried brush. In the evenings, children might gather scraps of kindling from the yard, carrying bundles of twigs into the house. The older members of the family broke larger logs, setting them carefully so that the fire would burn slow and steady through the night. If the flames ever died completely, relighting them was no easy task. Families guarded their embers carefully, covering them with ash before bed so that they smoldered until morning, ready to be coaxed back to life. Above the flames, a black iron pot often hung, suspended from a chain or wooden beam. This was the kitchen of the household. Soups, porridges, and stews simmered here for hours, sometimes flavored with little more than onions, cabbage, or barley. Meat was rare and precious, but when it was added to the pot, its scent filled the entire room. The hearth fed the family not only with warmth, but with sustenance. Fires were also the only light after sunset. As the sky darkened, the glow of the hearth became the sole lantern in the room. Shadows lengthened, flickering across faces and walls, creating a quiet atmosphere that seemed to belong to another world. You can imagine the sounds: the soft crackle of burning wood, the occasional hiss of sap, and the murmur of voices speaking low so as not to waste energy in long conversations. The wealthier households had larger hearths, sometimes big enough to roast whole animals. In castles and manors, vast open fireplaces dominated great halls, with chimneys to carry the smoke upward. Yet even here, the warmth rarely reached far. People sitting close to the fire felt its heat, but those further away remained chilled. Large rooms with stone walls swallowed warmth, leaving corners cold and damp. Servants scurried to keep braziers lit and logs stacked high. but even nobles learned that a fire could only do so much. Fires were also deeply symbolic. They marked the boundary between safety and danger. Outside was the freezing dark, filled with wolves, bandits, or simply the endless cold. Inside, the hearth created a circle of light where families felt secure. It became a gathering place for stories, prayers, and the small rituals of everyday life. Parents told tales to children by its glow, spinning legends of saints, heroes, or spirits that haunted the winter night. The smoke of the fire clung to everything: clothing, hair, and walls. Visitors could smell it as soon as they stepped inside. But this too was part of medieval life. To live without smoke would mean to live without fire, and that was impossible. The hearth, however imperfect, remained the most important part of the household. As you picture the family gathered there, you sense their reliance on these flames. The fire was never strong enough to drive out the cold completely. Drafts still crept through windows, and stone walls radiated chill. But within that glowing circle, people found comfort. They leaned closer, hands stretched toward the heat, faces lit softly by orange light. The fire did not conquer the winter, but it gave them just enough strength to endure it. So when you think of medieval winters, remember the hearth, not grand, not efficient, but essential. It was a fragile beacon in a world of frost and shadows, the one constant presence that turned survival into something just a little warmer, a little brighter, and a little more human. The fire may glow in the hearth, but its warmth reaches only a short distance. Beyond that faint circle of heat, the chill lingers in every corner of the medieval home. To endure it, people wrapped themselves in clothing, not just for modesty, but for survival. Layer upon layer, wool over linen, cloak over tunic. They built their own shield against the winter air. Picture yourself in the morning, when the cold bites hardest. You reach for the first layer. A simple linen shirt, coarse and rough against the skin. Linen is light and breathable, the fabric worn closest to the body in nearly every class of society. Though it offers little warmth on its own, it forms the foundation for everything that follows. Over it goes a woolen tunic, thick and heavy, woven from the fleece of sheep raised in the village pastures. Wool, scratchy and strong, holds warmth even when damp. For peasants, clothing is plain and practical. Tunics are dyed in simple earth tones or left undyed, the color of the wool itself: grays, browns, or off-whites. Over the tunic comes a mantle or cloak, fastened at the shoulder with a simple pin. If fortune allows, another cloak might be layered above it, turning the body into a bundle of fabric. Hands slip into mittens of wool, feet into boots stuffed with straw or scraps of fur. Everything is chosen with one goal: to keep the body's warmth from escaping into the frozen air. Nobles, of course, dress with more style. Their linen is softer, their wool finely woven. Cloaks are lined with fur, fox, squirrel, or even the prized ermine. Collars, too, mark their wealth: deep reds, blues, and greens dyed with costly pigments. Yet beneath all the richness, the principle is the same. Layer after layer, fabric traps air close to the skin, creating insulation against the cold. Even the wealthiest lord must rely on wool and linen, for no material yet exists that can truly conquer the winter. Children are wrapped tightly, sometimes in hand-me-down garments far too big for their small frames. A mother might wind strips of cloth around a child's legs, like makeshift wrappings, to protect them from frost. Babies are swaddled in layers of wool, bundled so securely that they resemble little more than cloth-wrapped figures beside the fire. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, depends on fabric to stand between them and the cold. At night, when people crawl into bed, they do not change into lighter clothing. Instead, they sleep in their day garments. Cloaks pulled over their shoulders, hats kept on their heads. Woolen caps, known as coifs or hoods, are especially common, for it is said that much heat escapes from the head. Feet remain covered, sometimes in leather shoes, sometimes wrapped in strips of cloth. Blankets are few, so clothing itself becomes the bedding, the cocoon that makes rest possible. Imagine the feel of these layers against your body. They are heavy, restrictive, and often damp from snow or sweat. Washing is rare in winter, for water freezes quickly, and drying clothes takes days. The air inside the home is filled with the musty scent of wool, smoke from the fire, and the faint odor of unwashed fabric. Yet no one complains, because every thread matters. Every layer makes the difference between shivering through the night and sleeping, with some measure of warmth. You notice the ingenuity of small tricks. A woman might sew patches of fur onto the inside of a cloak, placing them near the chest where heat is most easily lost. Men wrap woolen strips around their lower legs, creating something like medieval leg warmers. Scarves and hoods are pulled low, leaving only narrow openings for eyes. These adjustments are simple, but they mean survival. The clothing is not only practical, but also symbolic. In winter, a person's layers reflect their place in society. A peasant, bundled in plain gray wool, stands beside a noble draped in fur-lined velvet. Yet both shiver under the same cold sky. No matter how rich the garments, the body still longs for warmth, and winter humbles all. Think of yourself now, wrapped in these layers, sitting close to the fire. You tug the cloak tighter, pull the hood lower, and feel the scratch of wool against your skin. The cold is still there, pressing at the edges, but your body creates its own small refuge. This is how medieval people lived through the season. Not with comfort, but with endurance, protected by the humble strength of wool and the quiet resilience of linen.